Hey my bookish lovelies, Kara here, and today I'm going to be talking about the 5 science fiction fantasy books that I cannot stop recommending. These are books that I've read over the last few years that have really stuck with me, and I just cannot tell you enough how much I want everybody to read these books. These books are some of my all-time favorites. They were all 5-star reads for me, and I just absolutely positively love each and every one of these books. So I really wanted to share my top 5 science fiction fantasy books with you guys. The first book that I'm going to talk about is Hench by Natalie Zena Walshcott. For anybody that loves supervillains and for people that enjoy admiring superheroes from a distance, this book is just so many things. One of the major things it is it follows henchmen instead of the superheroes, and so our main person who is this henchman is Anna, and she works for a temp agency where she gets sent to various supervillains to be employed by them. Well, at the very beginning of this, she gets sent to a supervillain who is one of the smaller time villains, and he takes a shine to her and ends up inviting her out to help him with one of his villainy type things where he kidnaps some very important kids in the neighborhood. But everything kind of falls apart from there. The superhero Super Collider shows up and just kind of rescues everything, and in the process slams her against the wall and shatters her leg. Nothing is ever the same for Anna after this moment. There is a trigger warning in this for gaslighting, graphical surgical procedures, and abuse. After Anna gets to the hospital, the police come to question her and say, hey, so what did the supervillain do to you? And she's like, the supervillain didn't do anything to me. It was your superhero Super Collider. And the cop tells her, well, you must be confused. So everybody just assumes that the superheroes can do absolutely no wrong, and the supervillains are evil regardless of the situation. So I really like the fact that this took a totally different approach to superhero versus supervillain dichotomy, and I really love that you get to see how supervillains are created, and sometimes superheroes are responsible for their villainous counterparts. This book was one of the most intimate looks at the supervillain persona that I've ever read, because we are following henchmen instead of the supervillains, so we really get to see how evil plans work from the inside. Intermittently, this book is highly technical because after Anna comes out of the hospital, she starts running data analysis to find out whether or not heroes are actually helping or hurting more. And what she comes across is really starting to do detriment to the image of superheroes, and she ends up getting recruited by a very high-profile supervillain. Because of the approach that this book takes, it is sometimes technical, but it is always very well explained and very well thought out. This book was amazing in the fact that it was so well detailed, that I really understood how they were running data analysis, which kind of sounds boring, but it's a very small portion of the book. So really what you're getting is kind of an insight into how this evil villain operation is actually working. Because this book can be extremely harsh, this book was raw and angry and just so straight to the point. Also very well paced and excellently fleshed out. Because of all of that, this book actually made it into my top 5. Because of the harshness in this, there are some extremely tender moments that had me oh my god, this is just the sweetest thing. So this book is not all sharp edges. There are some really beautiful scenes that I just absolutely love. Because these scenes are few and far in between, and because the majority of the book can have a anger and a harshness to it, these scenes become all the more important to let you know that these villains and their community that help them and their henchmen are not just henchmen to them. This is a community, there's a support network, and it's almost like a found community in this that is just so much fun and so wonderful, and it's just amazing. I love this book so much. The chapters are kind of long, but I didn't even realize as I was reading this that the chapters were as long as they were until after I did kind of a double take, because this book is just so well paced. I cannot talk about this book enough and talk about how much I absolutely positively just want everybody to read this. I do hope eventually that she'll come out with a sequel. It did end in such a way to where it can be a standalone, but should they decide to continue, there is more room for continuation, which I hope to see from the author in the future. So guys, definitely go out and read this book, because this book is just amazing. The next book that I'm going to recommend to you guys is Mem by Bethany C. Morrow. She recently came out with another book that I believe had to do with mermaids. I'm not really sure. But it was the very first book that I read by her, and this is a historical speculative fiction set in Montreal in the 1900s. Dolores Extract number 1 is a mem that's been created by a 19-year-old girl who stored a bad memory inside of this individual. Mems are actually created to house memories for individuals that can afford it. So each mem has a number and a name, and each mem usually only houses one memory. But Dolores Extract number 1 actually is different from all the other mems in where she actually starts developing a personality. She starts remembering more things than just that one memory, but that one memory really allowed her to branch off into becoming more human. This book is not just science speculative fiction. This book is also a look at humanity, the development of humanity, love, and everything like that comes with being human. One of the things like that I do find like that people have a complaint about this though is the way it was written. If you're familiar like with the stream of consciousness, stream of consciousness doesn't typically have punctuation, just goes from one thought to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And sometimes this book does that, but I felt that that gave it a more realistic tone because her memories were blending into her present, which is something that often happens to us in real life. So I really appreciated the way that this book was approached. I'm not usually a huge fan of novellas. Like, I struggle with novellas so much because I don't always feel like that they're fleshed out enough, but I feel like in such a short amount of time this book was able to flesh out so much regarding this world, and it was able to flesh it out in such a way like that felt real, authentic, and I wasn't left like with any questions at the end about how these things worked, and we actually got to see the results of a person who's had too many memories extracted. So I really love this book. It is one of the best, most beautiful books like that I've ever read, and I definitely highly recommend this. The next book that I'm going to discuss is The Wolf and the Whale by Jordana Max Brodsky. I have a full review of this if you guys are interested. I recorded it a couple years ago. I'm putting like the little card right up here just in case you guys are interested. If you guys want more of a deep dive review of this, because I highly recommend this one as well. This is another historical book that is set in 1000 AD, following our lead character Omat, who actually is very gender fluid. As a child, Omat was blessed by the white wolf, and all Omat's life she was blessed by her elders. From a very young age, in this culture, because they are Inuit, which actually like what we know as Eskimos, which on a side note, Eskimo is considered a slandered term. They don't like that. It's actually Inuit. I put the spelling link down below just in case you guys are curious about how it's spelled. If you guys want to do more research on it, I highly recommend it. But this is such an interesting approach like to a historical fantasy fiction novel like that. I think that this is another one that everybody should read. In this culture, only men are allowed to become shamans. Because Omat has not had her first bleed, she is still recognized as a shaman, and as her grandfather is a shaman, she is taken under his wing to learn what shamanism is about. Shamanism, you work very, very closely with the gods to make sure like that you get food and harvest and everything else like that you could possibly need for the long, harsh winters that come with being in a very cold region that they live in. And also another thing that angers the gods is women hunting, so that's another thing that they're not allowed to do. But because Omat is so androgynous and so gender fluid, she doesn't really recognize herself as a woman. She actually recognizes herself more as a man. And as long as she doesn't have her first bleed, she can continue to be a shaman without the rest of the villagers feeling like they're going to be cursed for having her perform that particular job. All of this, all of the prestige that she has earned in her tribe changes one day when a stranger comes to visit the tribe and offer their support in helping them to find food. This book has a trigger warning for rape, discussions of rape, violence, and death. This entire story circulates around Omat and her quest to regain power and autonomy in a world where women don't really have much of a say. This book also follows her quest to regain her own personal power and embrace both her masculine and feminine sides. This book was a surreal and amazing experience. It combines both Inuit mythology and also Norse mythology, and it has a joining of the two like that I've never seen before in any other book. But this book kind of goes back and forth between a realistic look at what 1800 AD looks like, especially because it was about the time that the Christianity is starting to go throughout the entire world. So we kind of see like things outside of the Inuit tribe are starting to change a lot more than probably like anybody would have expected, including with the Norsemen that she encounters along her journey. The portions of this book though where we do get magic and where we do get like a lot of fantastical elements feel so realistic, and I feel like it's so hard to do, to blend both a historical contemporary setting and a fantastical element with the gods, and I feel like this book does a fantastic job of both. To me, if you enjoyed the Poppy War, I feel like this is going to be a book that you're going to really enjoy, because it's just so many things, and it just is such an exploration of what it means to be a person, and I can't recommend this enough. This book also has a little bit of a romance in it, unlike the Poppy War, which is more just war and everything else, but this does have a little bit of a romance in it that is very redeeming and gratifying and beautiful and pretty much everything that I possibly could have wanted. This book blends so many wonderful elements, and this is another like one that even a couple years later I still think about this book all the time. Like I can't stop thinking about this book. The next book that I'm going to talk about is The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. This book actually just came out last year, and good news, I found out that this is going to be the first in a series, because they are making another one that goes along the same lines of this book, and I am super excited for this. I don't know who the main character is going to be yet, if it's going to be Emmanuel or anything else, but I'm really excited about that because this book was also very fabulous. This book is about Emmanuel, our main character, who is a mixed race girl. She grew up in a Puritan style society with her white grandfather and grandmother. Her mother had died in childbirth and her father had died on a pyre. Emmanuel is basically the only mixed race girl in her village, because a lot of the people with ebony skin live on the outskirts of the village, but because she has a mixed heritage, she isn't quite accepted anywhere. Now, the woods near their village are strictly forbidden because people have gone missing in the woods for what the Puritan society attributes to witches. One day, Emmanuel ends up in the woods after chasing after some livestock, and she ends up encountering 3 beings that give her her mother's journal. This journal sends her down a path to discover herself and everything that has to do with her heritage, who her mother was, and these manifestations of the witches that are said to have plagued the woods. This book is another book that kind of combines a historical contemporary setting, but also a very fantastical element, and I feel like this book is another one that just does so well in that approach, because it is really hard to make witches sometimes feel realistic and without disjointing the whole story, and this book does not do that. This book approaches witches from a very delicate angle, but also approaches the puritanical society and the belief in the existence of supernatural entities from a very delicate standpoint, which allows this book to be the perfect blend of both the witches and the puritanical society. So I feel like this book just approaches everything just so perfectly. And one of the other things that I really liked about this is this story never felt like it was overdone or too much. It always just felt like it was just enough. And the pacing was excellent, and the story and the main character was just so amazing, and I loved her. There is a romance in here, and it was more of an overlapping addition to the story, but I love the love interest because he is just very supportive, and in spite of who his father is, he does not shy away from supporting Emmanuel and whatever thing that comes to pass with her. And so I really admire the love interest, and of course, like, it's just so many things. This book definitely did not disappoint, and I'm really excited to see where the sequel takes us, because I have a feeling like that I'm probably going to love that one just as much. The last book that I have to discuss is Necromantica by Keith Blenwyn and Christina Irwin. This is another novella that is about 192 pages, and it's self-published, and I came across it a while back, and I was really intrigued by its premise. The nation of Fortuna has been swept by war and death as the city prepares for a full-out orc invasion. During the whole episodic war situation, we have our main characters who have plans of their own regarding this battle that are set on the king. It's a thief and a necromancer. Lama is a thief rogue, and Morana is a elven necromancer. The bond that these two characters have is so amazing, and they're not really on anybody's side but their own. They're looking to steal an amulet from the king. Morana has a history with everything, and she is on the path to revenge, and Lama is trying to help her. A lot of the story is told between present and flashbacks, and we get to see like more of who Marana is and who Llama is, and how they are the way that they are, and then also how they form such a strong bond. This book is extremely brutal. There is a lot of war scenes, a lot of death scenes. It is just so intense. But in the process of like everything that's going on, you also get some tenderness between our two main characters that I just absolutely simp for. What really struck me about this book was not just the storyline, but the way it's written. It's very poetic, and the way it's written and approached is detailed in such a way that I had very clear images of what was happening and the scenery and everything that was going around us. I felt so immersed in this story, and the pacing on it was perfect. Given the fact that I typically struggle with novellas, I was pleasantly surprised by how well detailed this was and how wonderfully immersed I was in the entire setting and the story. And I just feel like that this is a book that we don't really talk about, and we don't like, I never hear anyone else talking about this book. So it's 192 pages, and I do highly recommend that if you are into fantasy, orc invasions, war, strong friendships, elven necromancers, and a plot for revenge, I feel like this is going to be up your alley, because it is just such a great book. Well guys, thank you so much for joining me. Those are the 5 science fiction fantasy books that I highly recommend, and I hope you guys will definitely check those out, because they are books like that I have read several years back, even some of them, and they still stick with me, and I still think about them all the time. And when people talk to me, these are the books that I recommend, probably above most others. But of course I have a lot of favorite books. These are just the ones like that I wanted to talk about, that I don't feel all of them get enough spotlight or enough attention, and they deserve way more attention than they're getting. So thank you guys so much for joining me. I have all of my social media down in the description below. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Amazon, and Goodreads. Those links are linked to the description below. I also have a few videos on Twitter. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I'll see you guys again very soon.